What is happening, my friends out there? My name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel. So today we're going to talk about Batman, and it's kind of cool because I grew up watching the Batman live-action movies of the 90s. My very first movie that I saw in a theater was Batman Returns. And it's even funny enough because today we're going to talk about the Batman Returns game that was on the SEGA Genesis. It's in my personal opinion that I feel like this game is very underappreciated on the SEGA Genesis. Granted, because it's a movie tie-in game, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I need to unpack about this. So grab your capes and cowls and your batarangs and let's get settled in. This is Batman Returns for the SEGA Genesis. Batman Returns is a movie tie-in game based on the second Tim Burton Batman film for the SEGA Genesis. The game loosely follows the events of the movie, but manages to be interesting in its own way at the same time. Not everything from the movie is here, but you'll be able to square up against Catwoman, the Penguin, and the Red Triangle Circus, as well as other enemies that appear throughout the movie. Unlike the previous Batman movie game, however, there is no level where you're able to drive the Batmobile. It shows up at the beginning of each stage, but you don't actually get to control it. Funny enough, the alternate version of Batman Returns on the SEGA CD has stages where you could actually drive the Batmobile and the Batboat. They play like a simple third-person driving game where you could dodge incoming attacks and shoot down enemies, but the rest of the game is identical to the Genesis version. There's a few short full-motion video cutscenes in the SEGA CD version, but beyond that, nothing more is different. I remember playing this on the Genesis back in the day because I was such a fan of the Batman movies. Batman Returns was the first superhero movie I actually saw in theaters when it came out. But has this movie tie-in game aged all that well after all this time? Yes, it has in a few different ways, but not in every way to make it an absolute classic on the SEGA Genesis. Now, the very first thing we do have to acknowledge is how different this game is on the SEGA CD compared to the SEGA Genesis. The big difference here is that there are driving stages including the Batmobile and the Batboat over on the SEGA CD version, and the SEGA Genesis doesn't really have that. You only see the Batmobile right before you enter a stage. And while a lot of people say that the SEGA CD version is better because of that reason, I don't think that's really the case. There are other differences, specifically in the soundtrack and a few other things here and there, that make the SEGA CD version feel like you're getting a little bit more value, but as someone that grew up with the Genesis version and really kind of like dissected it and played it a whole lot, I really think that the Genesis version is better gameplay-wise and a few other things here and there. It just feels like everything just matches up together perfectly. That being said, however, there are a few other things that we do have to acknowledge that are different about this game compared to the movie that it's actually based on. All the main characters like Batman, the Penguin, and Catwoman are present in this game, but the one character that is missing that is actually in the movie is Christopher Walken's character, which is Max Schreck. Throughout some of the different levels, you can see different places that say Schreck's on them, but Christopher Walken's character never actually makes an appearance in the game, which kind of is a bummer because Christopher Walken was one of those weird parts of the movie, but you're not really losing anything of value if he's not included in the game, other than the fact that it's not completely a full adaptation of the movie. Now that we got all that out the way, let's talk about gameplay, which I feel like is the best aspect of this game, with a few hiccups here and there. The first thing you'll notice about Batman Returns is the weird color choices for the graphics. Batman himself and everything else that would otherwise be colored pure black is changed to purple instead. No, this isn't another Prince invasion of a Batman movie. This was done so everything could stand out from the dark blue backgrounds and other dark colored areas. It's not something that bothers me, but it's immediately noticeable, especially when the Batmobile has mauve-like color to it. I'll let that slide for now, DC. Moving on, the gameplay is pretty straightforward. Batman can jump, punch, and kick anything that comes his way, but because you're Batman, you'll have access to all those wonderful toys. Batman has a full arsenal of gadgets and weapons that he could use when punching and kicking are way too risky. You have to gather ammo for each one hidden in the stages, but you could find a lot of that scattered around. Enemies come in all shapes and sizes, but they're nothing against your gadgets. You could dispose of just about anything with a gadget most of the time, with a few exceptions that take multiple hits to take down. Why risk punching and kicking something when you could just be Batman and throw something at it? If I'm being honest, however, sometimes the gadgets can break the balance of the game and make areas incredibly easy, while in other spots they hardly do anything at all. Some enemies can appear to be really cheap and can hit you multiple times or even knock you into a pit, but there's always some other silly way to get around them. Playing through the majority of Batman Returns is pretty simple and not really difficult, but it has its occasional moments of silliness, and yet I enjoyed playing through the majority of the game once again. Now, the gameplay of Batman Returns is fairly simple and straightforward. It's an action platformer very similar to some of the other Batman movie tie-in games. Only I find with Batman Returns on the SEGA Genesis, there's a little bit more to do. You have control over which gadgets you can use, you have very basic attacks that are very simple and easy to understand and put into use as you're going through each level. At the same time, it's also very direct in what you need to do. Just get from point A to point B at the end of the stage, and at the very end of every single act in the game, you fight against the Penguin in a big boss fight. Along the way, you'll also encounter Catwoman a few times here and there right before your fight with the Penguin, and that's pretty cool because Batman's going to be fighting both Catwoman and the Penguin. However, it is kind of a shame in the way that they kind of order certain events around. There's a big fight with Catwoman at the very end of the game that's supposed to simulate like their first meeting. It's supposed to be like a big grand battle, but it doesn't really go off on a high note. The boss fights involving the Penguin are very hit or miss, especially early on in the game if you have enough gadgets on hand in order to dispose of the Penguin. However, as you get towards the later half of the game and towards the final level, things get a little bit much more tougher, borderline unfair in some instances, but as long as you have enough gadgets to throw at the Penguin, every single boss fight that you have with him is pretty much a breeze. It is kind of cool that you get to fight against the big duck device that the Penguin rides in the movie. That is kind of funny, but it also is very mediocre when you finally face it. It just stands there and it fires just different Penguin rockets at you, and then after you damage it enough, it's followed up by a second fight with the Penguin in the final stage. The very final battle against the Penguin, when you're actually going one-on-one with him, does feel a little bit broken. Some of the mechanics and some of the hitboxes feel like they're out of whack here and there, especially when you're trying to dodge some of his actual bullets he's firing at you, and I think you take way too much damage against the Penguin. It doesn't feel like the Penguin should be that overpowered. Now, in hindsight, however, some of the other levels that you go to and some of the other boss fights and mini-boss fights you get involved with, they are pretty cool. They touch on different parts of the movie, but it never really kind of has like a cohesive narrative. It doesn't really have every single thing that you would expect that's in the film to appear in the game. You do get to have a mini-boss fight against that big dude from the Red Triangle Circus, you know, the one that Batman puts a bomb on. He killed that dude, by the way. That is kind of cool, but some of the other mini-boss fights, they're kind of mediocre at best. They're not really all that great. They're kind of throwaway and just kind of keep things moving, or just another obstacle to prevent you from getting to the Penguin. So they're kind of hit or miss, and some people might just kind of like not care for them overall. But one thing I do want to highlight that I think this game is very underappreciated for is the soundtrack of this game, which I actually really enjoy.
Let me take a second to acknowledge the soundtrack of this game. None of the music from the film is in here, which is a drag, but instead, we get some original music for each level and boss encounter. It might be a little stereotypical of Batman Returns to have game music instead of the iconic Batman theme music from the films, but this honestly didn't bother me. The music is unique and doesn't sound like other games. Weirdly enough, the soundtrack of the SEGA CD version was changed, which has a lot of weird tracks and in my honest opinion doesn't sound as good as the Genesis version. There's a sort of gritty, hard sound that just makes you feel like a badass walking around as Batman in the Genesis version. I'm serious here. Take a listen to this track from the first level and try not to tell me you don't hear Batman with each part of the beat. It's honestly my favorite in the entire game.
I'm sorry, I just really enjoy the soundtrack of this game. I feel like there is a couple good tracks in here. Granted, not every single music track is a home run. There are a couple bangers in here that I feel like everybody would really enjoy if you actually sit down and listen to them. And for that reason alone, I still feel like the Genesis version is much better than the SEGA CD soundtrack, at least that you get from that version of the game. It's just something about this type of sound that just works with the SEGA Genesis. It's that hard, gritty, kind of like really tough sound that you would get in other Genesis games, and it kind of just defines the sound of the console for me. Again, this is coming from someone that played this game a lot back in the day, so I may be a little bit biased to that, but I just enjoyed this soundtrack in this version of the game more so than I did on the SEGA CD, which feels like it's a little bit much more techno and gets away from that harsh, like gritty sound that you get in the Genesis version. I don't know, that's just my personal opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about that, because everybody has different taste in sounds, especially for games, but for me, this is like the best soundtrack for Batman Returns in any version of the game out there. So overall, did I enjoy Batman Returns on the SEGA Genesis? Is this a game that's a movie tie-in game that people should play today? Honestly, if you didn't really have a lot of nostalgia for Batman Returns, or you're not really a Batman fan, you're not going to get a lot out of this, but if you love Batman, or at least you love the comic book character, and you love like exploring different things about him, this is still a pretty cool game to play. Batman has had a lot of great games across all different types of platforms, and it's good to go back and actually see how far The Dark Knight has come in gaming form. It's a simple action platforming game that has a couple neat little features and a dope soundtrack to go along with it. Anyway guys, those are just my thoughts on Batman Returns for the SEGA Genesis. I hope you guys enjoyed this video review. Leave me a comment down below with your thoughts about Batman or Batman Returns or any of the Batman games that have been released throughout the years. What is some of your favorites? What are some of your best moments from Batman in video games? I mean, obviously we have the Arkham series and that's pretty cool, but look at all these other video games we've had across various platforms starring Batman. It's pretty damn awesome to go back and explore all those cool stuff. Leave some cool suggestions for everybody down below. And of course, don't forget to leave a like on this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos just like this one, all my reviews, all my podcast, talk show episodes, and a whole bunch of other great content that I know you guys are going to enjoy. And don't forget everybody, I am on Patreon. For the dollar level or higher, you're going to get a ton of exclusive content over on my Patreon page. There's links in the description box below. I am constantly posting new and exclusive content there all the time. I'm telling you, I'm trying to bring you guys a whole lot of value. Anyway, I will talk to all of you guys again very soon. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.
Thank you very much for checking out this video review, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel and check out the links I have here on the side to some more videos I have that I know you're really gonna love. And don't forget to check out my Patreon page for exclusive content and early access to new videos I post up here on YouTube. There's a lot of great content I know you're gonna love. I will talk to all of you guys again very soon. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.